Okay, so thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Today's talk, we're going to be building on what we were discussing last time. So last time we were discussing why you might be interested in building a PermaWeb application and a profit-sharing community in the first place. In general, I think, just to recap, the goal is to build applications that are ownerless in cyberspace, which share their profit with their backers. And their backers can either be, investors, also the founders, also the team, also people that send PRs, pull requests to the repository, essentially contributed to the code. So what we're trying to build is applications that are beyond everyone's reach and collectively developed, and the ownership, or well, not ownership exactly, the proceeds, you can fairly describe it as, are shared equitably between the people that have contributed in one way or another to the development of the application over time. And today's talk, we're going to go into the specifics of how do you actually build an application that does this, from first principles, right at the beginning. So the first thing is the PermaWeb applications are built in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Those are all the languages that you already know if you're used to web development. And if you don't already know them, then you learn them using any of the existing material out there on the web. Just Google "learn web development" and you'll find amazing resources. You can also use all of the existing frameworks and tools that you have. So that goes from React all the way through to the bundling systems that you use to create essentially single files which have all of your application built into one. All of that stuff works with the PermaWeb. Okay, so once you have your application and you test it and so on locally, and you want to deploy it and you want to see what it's like on the PermaWeb, use a system called ArkB, A-R-K-B. It's really simple. If you're used to command line services, that is, at least. You basically just say ArkB, and here are the examples closer up. You give it ArkB deploy folder, and you just give it a path, and then it's going to deploy everything in your folder. And if there's an index.html, then when you go to the link that it's going to give you, you're just going to be taken to the index.html. And if there's no index.html, you can say --index and make, as described here in this third example, custom.html. So it's very, very, very simple, very easy to do. Okay. Once you have your application live on the PermaWeb, you're probably going to want to have dynamic user content. And the way that we do this with Arweave is we use Arweave.js. So as well as being a data storage system, you can also think of the Arweave network as a document storage service. So what we mean by that is you can store a piece of data, but you can store arbitrary metadata associated with that. So there's basic stuff like who uploaded it, when did they upload it, but there's also a space for arbitrary tags. So I know Axel is here in the audience, for example, building Agora, which is essentially a decentralized public square, kind of Twitter-like system, but nobody owns it and no one controls it directly. They have a system where people can post, I think they call them something slightly different from tweets, but basically the same idea. And you would just add a tag on your post to the network that says, app name Agora, type tweet or post or whatever it is. And so now you can send these to the network with the user's wallet signing it, and the network will then allow you to query for it. We'll get to the querying side in a second, but just the writing to the network is done through Arweave.js. It's really, really simple. So you get the user's key somehow, or if you don't want to use the user's key in the browser, you just leave this blank. Actually, if you put undefined where this key is, then it's going to default to using rconnect. And you just make the transaction, give it whatever tags, data, quantity, and target. So this here is sending some tokens to someone, but it's just as easy to add a piece of data that has no target, doesn't transfer anything, but it does have a bunch of tags, or it's got a bunch of data, or whatever it is. It's all pretty simple stuff. The docs are, if you just search Arweave.js GitHub, you'll find it. It's very, very simple to get started with. Then you can query that data that you've written to the network back through GraphQL. So GraphQL is a great querying language that is not always specific. I think it was originally developed by Facebook back in like 2012, I'm going to say. That's an approximate. But back in 2012, ish. And it was made so that you can get access to large amounts of data that is structured in a specific app or an application-specific format through an API that is not application-specific. And so this turns out to be really great for what Arweave does, because you have this one interface, GraphQL, which can allow you to get access to every single thing on the network which is tagged. So a simple example of this is, find me everything that was submitted to the network which has a content type. So this is one of the tags, text/HTML. So it's a web page. And the user agent, so the uploader, was Arweave Auto DPL, which is an automatic decentralized public library creation system that was running for a while. Yes, so you can just run this query, but it could just as easily be, app name Agora type post, and it'll just give you back all of the transaction IDs of all of the associated information from the network. And then you can go through with Arweave.js and say, okay, get me that transaction. And you just do this in parallel. And there you go. You have access to all of the other users' data as well as your own in a dynamic way inside a fully decentralized web application, which is pretty cool. So now you've got an application which can read data from the network. Well, for a start, it's read from the network. So it's downloaded to the user's computer from the network itself. It's transmitting data to the network when the user wants to interact with an application. It's querying and finding that data and then displaying it to the user in a sensible way as a result of GraphQL. Great. Well, now we've got to get to that other part. So that, I would say, is a permanent decentralized web application. It's going to live forever. You don't have to touch it. You can't control it. No one can. It's governed by its code. But now we want to get to that component, which is distributing the proceeds of the web application to the stakeholders, whether they be, contributors, investors, or founders, or whoever it is, people that have backed the application. So you would typically do this through SmartWeave's, I think it's a built-in function, which we can find here, select weighted PST holder. It's a little bit confusing, but name, or at least a long name. But basically, a PST is a profit-sharing token. So the idea is that if you own 50% of a profit-sharing token, you own, or you will receive 50% of the profit generated by that revenue stream, whatever it happens to be, going forward. And so in the case of Agora, when someone posts a tweet, there's probably going to be a small tip that's given to the people that backed the application in the first place. So you just get this function from the library SmartWeave. It's just SmartWeave.js. It's very, very simple. And you say select weighted PST holder. And what this is going to do is it's saying, okay, so if I own 50% and two of you from the audience own 25% each, then a fourth of the time you're going to each get the tip, and half the time I'm going to get the tip. And so it's just an easy wrapper for that logic. And then you can just say, as it does here, create a transaction. Target is the person, the holder, and the quantity, you set that to whatever you think the tip should be, sign it, post it. Easy. And so if you integrate this into your application, well, now you have a permanent web application that's fully decentralized, where the profit is spread between the people that own a token. And so, of course, if people are using this application, there is a financial stream associated with it. And so there is a value, an intrinsic, fundamental, hard value to that token you've created. That's really cool. People can go trade it. And there you go. You have an economy around your application now. And what, like 5 extra lines or something. Okay, cool. So this is a simple way of sharing the application's profit, but you might want to get a little bit more advanced than that, essentially. So we would recommend that, or argue, I think is a better word for it. We would argue that one of the cool things about crypto and specifically about PermaWeb applications is that they are they are ownerless and not controlled by anyone. However, there might be parts that you want to delegate control to as part of the code of the application itself, so embedded in the application. Governance of various components. So an obvious thing to look at would be like, well, shall we have a system whereby we and this will have interesting effects, but you might want to choose to do it where you can elect moderators, and then those moderators can go around and they have a special like hide button. They can't delete content from the application that's stored on the network, but they can hide it, for example. Or maybe there's a system whereby, so I know that Agora is planning to do this. They have these kind of planets, and the planets can be owned and controlled by, or they will be able to be, through a community. And that community of people can vote on, what content should or should not be allowed inside that planet. The interesting part about all of this is that the application itself is still immutable and ownerless. It's just that you're kind of agreeing the rules for governance inside the application as part of the application itself. And so there's a really simple PermaWeb application on top of the network called CommunityXYZ, which allows you to essentially build these communities that have these voting systems, and allows you to control them through a nice user interface. And that essentially looks like this. So you can go to this website, you can see who owns all the tokens inside a different community, what the latest activity on the community is, what the votes are. You can lock stuff, and you can even have these opportunities where it's like basically, if you're building an application which is backed by a profit-sharing community, you can say, hey, I would like to mint 0.1% of the token supply for you, an extra 0.1%. If you build a comment system or whatever it is into my application, you can go along and say, oh, that looks pretty good. You build it, you ship it, you get some ownership of the application. And so now you become one of these stakeholders, get a share of the profit of the thing you've built. So that's CommunityXYZ. Now I think this one is a kind of bonus. Everything up to here is just like it kind of works. You can go and build just that, and you can have you'll be able to get to the mainstream if you want to. However, if you want to go faster, I would argue that one of the things that profit-sharing community-backed applications can do, which Web 2 applications really can't, is allow you to give ownership of the application itself to contributors in terms that are not development, investment, or founding the thing in the first place. And what that means is, well, imagine you had YouTube, and at the beginning, YouTube didn't have any money, right? But there were some people that found it and they started making content. And bear in mind that YouTube is like what? And actually the web in general is like 99% content consumers versus 1% content creators. So those creators are actually generating a lot of the engagement that makes the engine of the application go round. So what if you could come along and say, well, if you contribute a video and it gets a certain number of views, then we're going to give you, 0.0001% or whatever it is of the application. So now your content creators become your stakeholders, but they also become, I guess, incentivized around the success of the platform. Again, let's think back to YouTube. What would have happened if the first content creators became stakeholders in it? Well, they would have been more passionate about pushing YouTube amongst their existing audiences on, Twitter or whatever it is. Sorry, screw here. On Twitter or whatever it is, because they're like, oh, I want this thing to succeed because I own a small piece of it. And of course, what you can do is you can say you own a piece of it, but you're not allowed to sell it for 2 years, or maybe you release half after a year or half after 3 months or whatever it is. You can set up some kind of locking system so they are locked into the success of the project long term. And there's a system in the ecosystem. There's a project in the ecosystem called Astatine, which is an automatic profit-sharing token distributor. And it looks a little bit weird and complicated to get started with, but basically what it allows you to do is to create an exponentially decaying curve of tokens that should be released over time, proportionately to some activity on your application. It allows you to launch this in 5 minutes. So we can think of this as similar to what Bitcoin is doing. And it says, okay, so if you're a miner, there's an exponentially decaying curve of Bitcoin being released as you contribute security to the network. Or Arweave, there's an exponentially decaying curve of tokens being released when you store a piece of data. Well, you can make it so that there's an exponentially decaying curve of tokens being released when you contribute a video, when you or contribute a video that gets some number of views. Maybe you make it proportionate to the number of views on those videos. Maybe it's a number of tweets, engagements with those tweets. Whatever it is, go wild. It's arbitrarily programmable using this very, very simple system. And we think that this can be one of the cornerstone drivers for Web3 adoption, because it's just something that Web 2 can't do, and is a very powerful incentive to get people behind your application. They're now not just kind of passive users that are basically going to eventually be exploited by the application if they're getting it for free, right? Like if you're not paying you other products, as they say. Now they are active participants in the community that is the application itself, or at least is its constituent. Super powerful. You can also verify your users with ArVerify. So if you need a system that does Sybil resistance, you're like, okay, Sam, that's kind of cool, but what if people come along and they're like, I'm going to upload 10,000 videos today and get the whole reward? Well, there's a system for avoiding that. It's called ArVerify. It works using a modified version of Google's PageRank, except it does PageRank for humans. So basically, humans verify each other. And when they do, they get a score. And if you have a high ArVerify score and you verify someone else, then it's not like it transfers, it's like it kind of duplicates somewhat your score to that person. But you don't really have to understand all of that. You just have to understand, well, hey, if I use Arweave.js, I can get a little blue tick next to people's name if they are a valid user, and a human, not just a user of the network. Can be a really useful tool. Okay. There's also ArDrive has this really interesting system for turning Arweave into something that's closer to a file system. It's called RFS. You could argue that Arweave is a very low-level system to some extent. It's like writing sectors to a hard drive. There aren't nice tools for doing stuff like updating or referring to what is a file anyway. It doesn't have a name; it has a hash in Arweave land. Well, RFS is a system on top of that base layer, which makes it so that you can say, okay, so here's a drive. And in the drive, these people are allowed to write to it. And it can have these names. You can have folders, stuff inside the folders. You can rename stuff. You can even delete stuff, or at least unlink it. It's just a very simple system for abstracting on top of the base Arweave storage layer. Might be interesting and useful to you. All right, so that was a whirlwind tour of everything you need in order to be able to build on top of the Arweave network. Let's just go to the coffee and mingle area and go chat. Excited to see you all there. Thanks, everyone.